Every second, billions of tiny particles are falling through the ocean. They are fragments of dead algae, microscopic organisms, waste, mucus, and organic debris. Seen in underwater lights, they drift downward like snow. For decades, scientists treated this marine snow as one of the ocean's most important delivery systems. It carries food from the sunlit surface into the dark ocean and transports carbon away from the atmosphere. Some of that material is eaten on the way down. Some reaches the seafloor and becomes buried for extremely long periods. But new laboratory research suggests that marine snow may be losing much of its cargo through a process scientists had underestimated. At depths between roughly 2 and 6 kilometers, the pressure of the surrounding water becomes so intense that it forces dissolved compounds out of sinking particles. The marine snow begins to leak carbon and nitrogen into the water around it. Instead of reaching the seafloor intact, part of each particle becomes a cloud of invisible food for deep-sea microbes. In the experiments, sinking particles lost as much as half of their original carbon and between 58 and 63% of their nitrogen. When microbes were exposed to the released material, their numbers increased approximately 30-fold within 2 days. The discovery may change two major ideas at once. The deep ocean may contain more usable food than scientists assumed, and the ocean's biological carbon pump may store carbon differently from the way many models describe it. The story begins near the surface. Sunlight reaches only the upper layer of the ocean. Here, microscopic algae called phytoplankton use photosynthesis to absorb carbon dioxide and build organic matter. They form the base of most marine food webs and help move huge quantities of carbon between the atmosphere and ocean. Phytoplankton are eaten by zooplankton. Cells die. Animals produce waste. Sticky biological material joins the fragments together. Over time, tiny pieces collide and form larger aggregates. Once these particles become dense enough, gravity pulls them downward. A single marine snow particle may be smaller than a grain of rice, but the combined downward flow stretches across nearly the entire ocean. It connects the bright surface to a world that may lie several kilometers below. This process is a major part of the biological carbon pump. Carbon dioxide enters surface organisms, becomes organic matter, and sinks into deeper water. If that carbon remains deep, it is separated from the atmosphere for decades, centuries, or sometimes much longer. The fate of each particle therefore matters. Imagine the ocean as an enormous storage system. The surface is where carbon enters. Sinking marine snow is the transport vehicle. Deep water is temporary storage, while buried sediment is the long-term vault. Scientists have spent years trying to calculate how much carbon reaches each level. But many models treat sinking particles mainly as objects being broken down by microbes or eaten by animals. The new experiments highlight another mechanism. Pressure itself may force dissolved material out of the particles. The pressure increase with depth is enormous. At sea level, the air above us produces approximately 1 atmosphere of pressure. Underwater, another atmosphere is added for roughly every 10 meters of depth. At 1,000 meters, the pressure approaches 100 times that experienced at the surface. Several kilometers down, particles are surrounded by hundreds of atmospheres of pressure. Humans experience this environment as crushing. Marine organisms and particles experience it as a basic physical condition. The researchers compared the effect to a giant juicer. As the pressure increases, proteins, carbohydrates, and other dissolved organic compounds are squeezed from the marine snow and released into the surrounding water. To test this process, the team first had to create controlled marine snow in the laboratory. They used several species of diatoms, microscopic algae surrounded by intricate silica shells. Diatoms naturally clump together and contribute substantially to sinking organic particles in the real ocean. The scientists placed the aggregates inside specially constructed pressure tanks. The tanks could recreate conditions found kilometers beneath the sea. They also rotated continuously, keeping the particles suspended instead of allowing them to settle at the bottom. This design allowed the researchers to simulate a particle sinking through the water column while measuring what escaped from it. Under increasing pressure, dissolved carbon and nitrogen leaked from the aggregates. The effect appeared across several diatom species, suggesting it was not limited to one unusual organism. Most of the leaked material consisted of compounds such as proteins and carbohydrates that microbes can use relatively easily. Then the scientists tested what happened when deepwater microbes encountered this newly released food. The response was rapid. Within 2 days, bacterial abundance rose by around 30 times. Respiration also increased sharply, showing that the microbes were not merely present near the material. They were actively consuming it and converting it through metabolism. This helps explain how microbial communities survive in one of Earth's largest habitats. The deep ocean contains no sunlight for photosynthesis. Organisms living there depend mainly on energy produced elsewhere. Some food arrives as marine snow. Larger events such as dead fish or whale falls provide temporary feasts. Chemical energy near hydrothermal vents supports specialized ecosystems. But much of the deep water has traditionally been described as a nutrient desert. Food particles are widely scattered, and most organic matter is consumed before reaching great depths. The newly identified leakage process creates another possibility. A particle does not need to be captured or physically consumed to feed the surrounding ecosystem. As pressure forces dissolved compounds into the water, free-living microbes can access them directly. Every sinking particle may leave an invisible trail of carbon and nitrogen behind it. Picture a piece of fruit being squeezed as it falls through several kilometers of water. The solid object continues downward, but juice spreads into the surrounding environment. Microbes floating nearby do not need to catch the fruit. They consume the material leaking from it. At the scale of one particle, the amount is tiny. Across the global ocean, the combined effect could be substantial. It may also change where scientists believe carbon is stored. Carbon that reaches and becomes buried beneath the seafloor can remain isolated for millions of years. Over geological time, the burial of organic matter contributed to the formation of many oil and gas deposits. Carbon released into deep water is still stored, but not in the same way. It may remain below the surface for hundreds or thousands of years before ocean circulation eventually carries it upward. Once it reaches shallower water, microbes can convert it into carbon dioxide that may return to the atmosphere. Both pathways remove carbon from immediate contact with the air, but their timescales are dramatically different. One resembles placing money in a long-term account that cannot be accessed for millions of years. The other resembles storing it in an account that may remain untouched for centuries but eventually returns to circulation. If marine snow leaks more carbon into deep water than models currently assume, less may reach permanent sediment burial. At the same time, the deep ocean water column may contain a larger pool of biologically available carbon than previously recognized. This does not mean the ocean has suddenly lost its role as a carbon sink. Deep water still stores enormous quantities of carbon, and the biological pump remains essential to Earth's climate system. The discovery instead changes the route. Carbon moving downward may pass through multiple stages. It can begin inside phytoplankton, become part of an aggregate, leak into the surrounding water under pressure, enter bacterial cells, be respired, and remain dissolved in deep water. Each transformation affects how long the carbon stays away from the atmosphere and where it travels next. That matters for climate models. Models cannot represent every particle or microbe individually. They use equations to estimate how quickly organic matter sinks, how rapidly it decomposes, and how much carbon reaches different depths. A missing or underestimated process can change those estimates. If high pressure consistently causes particles to lose large fractions of carbon and nitrogen, models may need to include pressure-driven leakage when calculating deep ocean carbon storage. But the study also has an important limitation. The researchers observed the process in controlled laboratory pressure tanks. They have not yet directly measured its global strength in the open ocean. Real marine snow is more complicated than laboratory aggregates. It can contain minerals, mucus, animal waste, bacteria, and material from many different organisms. Particles also sink at different speeds. Some are compact and dense. Others are fragile and porous. Animals may break them apart or combine them into larger pellets. Currents move them sideways, and chemical conditions change between ocean regions. The experiments show that pressure can cause strong leakage. The next question is how often, how quickly, and at what scale this happens in nature. The research team plans to search for molecular fingerprints of the process during an expedition to the Arctic Ocean aboard the research vessel Polarstern. They will compare material in surface and deep water to see whether the compounds released in the laboratory can also be detected in the real ocean. That field evidence will be crucial. The mechanism may be widespread because pressure increases predictably with depth in every ocean basin. But its importance could vary depending on the types of particles, biological communities, temperature, oxygen conditions, and sinking rates. In some regions, fast-sinking particles may reach the bottom before losing most of their contents. In others, slow, porous aggregates may release large amounts into the water column. The discovery also creates a deeper ecological question. If pressure-driven leakage feeds microbes throughout the deep ocean, then these microorganisms may influence how much carbon continues toward the seafloor. Once microbes consume the leaked compounds, they convert part into new biomass and part into carbon dioxide through respiration. Some microbial cells may later attach to particles and sink. Others may remain suspended. Viruses may rupture them and release their contents again. The carbon does not follow one simple path. It enters a network. This is why the ocean's carbon pump is difficult to measure. What appears from the surface to be a downward rain of material becomes a series of transformations in darkness. A particle sinks. Pressure squeezes it. Microbes feed. Carbon changes form. Some continues downward. Some remains in the water. Some may eventually return to the atmosphere centuries later. The smallest organisms decide much of what happens next. The most striking part of the new research is that the deep ocean itself may be creating the food supply. Pressure is not merely an obstacle that life must survive. It may actively release the compounds that allow microbial ecosystems to grow. For years, scientists viewed marine snow as sealed packages carrying carbon and nutrients into the abyss. The new experiments suggest those packages may be leaking throughout their journey. The snow still falls. The carbon still sinks. But deep beneath the surface, the weight of the ocean may be opening every particle and feeding an invisible world along the way.